Okay, Lorraine, we were talking about ethnographies earlier and some of the storytelling that you've got, because a tremendous amount of anthropology is around storytelling, and you offered that you would share a story about the forest people.
Yeah, sure. The Forest People is a really compelling ethnography. And let me back up and say, an ethnography is sort of the traditional way that sociocultural anthropologists would collect knowledge. And it involves going and living with some people and participating in their culture to the extent that they accept you and allow you. You never force yourself, if you're not welcome, say at a sacred ritual, and observing them and just learning as much as you possibly can. And in order to ensure that we do our best to overcome our own cultural baggage, that we of course try to get rid of, we try to get down everything we possibly can. The idea being that if we get down everything, we're not bringing any filters in. As soon as we start filtering, then we're bringing our own stuff in terms of what we think is important and not. So The Forest People was written by a British anthropologist named Colin Turnbull, and it was actually published in 1954, so it's really quite old, and what's happened to the people he studied since then has not really been very positive at all. But it's still a well-loved and used ethnography because it's so engaging. He wrote it so well, he just brings the people to life. The Forest People are people, their actual name is the Bambuti people, and they live in the northeastern corner of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The world knows them as pygmies because they're generally under 5 feet. Men are about 4'10" or 4'11", and women are about 4'6" to 4'8" on average, although that's rather a pejorative term that I only use to give some context to people who otherwise wouldn't know who they are. And Colin Turnbull was quite a tall Englishman and learned how important it is to be short when you're running through the forest and having to duck so that you don't hit your head, whereas the people he was with didn't have to duck. So you could clearly see signs of how they'd adapted to the forest. But anyway, even though this is an older ethnography, you get so much information about this culture. You learn so much about these people. But it's so engaging. The people, they don't just seem like, academic information. It seems like you really see that these are real live people with real lives and loves and cares and problems and challenges, and it's just such a wonderful introduction to what it's like to be completely immersed in another culture and to go through the whole process of learning their language, learning not just what they do and sort of the superficial things, what food they eat and how they hunt and so on, but really what goes on inside. One example was there's a really sacred ritual called the Molimo, and the men sing, they play the Molimo in times of stress or danger, or if there's been a death and that kind of thing. And it's kind of funny because women aren't supposed to know anything about the Molimo, and they're supposed to stay shut in their huts, and the men all believe they do this, and none of the women actually follow through. But Turnbull thought that the Molimo would be like a long log that had been, it's a long instrument. He thought it would be long and carved elaborately, and it would be really sacred. And then when he was invited to a Molimo gathering, and they were using like an old drain pipe, and he was like, what is this? This is supposed to be sacred, and it's an old drain pipe. And they were like, the material doesn't matter. What matters is how we make the Molimo sing and what it means to us. So that was a real lesson in not bringing any expectations, not expecting that, something that's sacred has to look sacred to our eyes. And it was whether it was a drain pipe or a carved log, it was no less sacred to the Bambuti people. So that's just one example. There were many stories of a young man named Kenge who became his closest confidant, and we call them informants in anthropology, and how much he learned about the world through Kenge's eyes. So this book, even though it's over half a century old, is still sometimes used in university courses today because it helps us understand anthropology and sociocultural anthropology so much better. The task today is knowing that these people are in a terrible situation in ongoing civil war and oppression in Northeast Democratic Republic of Congo. What can we do along with them to help them preserve their lands, help them preserve their culture in a world in which it's becoming increasingly difficult for them to do that.
Awesome. Awesome. So when you are relating the story to students, what are some of the reactions or responses of students?
I would say to this, it's sort of the usual. Some look disinterested, and others look like they're really, really interested. It's like when I read that story, Eating Christmas in the Kalahari, some people are hanging on every word and loving the jokes about, roaring shit and that kind of thing, and others are like sleeping. So it's sort of
a
like
mix.
Okay. Like everything, it's a mix.
Okay, thanks, Lorraine.